our sexuality is powerful, and anything that has a lot of power has the ability to present danger. Thousands of years, we've been afraid to lean into this and taught to be afraid because that's where a lot of our power is. Like when women stand together, whoa, like it's one thing when you have one powerful woman, but when you have a lot, that's a whole other thing. And it's my belief that in every woman, there is this priestess that holds herself immaculately and can also hold others and stands for the highest love for herself and her sisters and her beloved and the world. And part of that is being sexually liberated and a leader in love and initiatrix as well. And just like be devoted to like feeling the godliness in her body.
I'm just so grateful that there are women like you who feel this strong call to really lead with this liberated love and sensuality and integrity. It allows us to know that this is out there, it's possible, and to go explore our ranges and our curiosities. Feel like I want to cleanse and uplift this space before we move into this conversation. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Fire and Soul. I am so happy that you are here and that you actually got curious about the title and that you want to drop into this really juicy, deeply liberating, super needed conversation around shamanic sexuality and really healing any shame and shadows, so that we can really be liberated in our sensuality, our sexuality through today's guest, Leola Watkins. This is a beautiful conversation. It runs deep, and I really feel that you're going to find yourself in here in whatever range or curiosity brought you to this conversation. My hope is that you allow that curiosity to fuel you even more into some sort of inspired action of truly coming home to your body, coming home to your heart, your intuition, your light, and your dark feminine, and so many of the beautiful weavings of this conversation. I didn't know where it was going to go. It went in a lot of different ways, but there's a beautiful through line of so much liberation. And so for that, I couldn't be more thrilled to bring the conversation to you. And this is such a big call on my soul these days, this awakening of so many different layers and levels. And what does that even mean? And I really do feel that in life and in business and everything is spiritual. So part of this spiritual awakening is awakening to all aspects of ourselves and to be embodied from that holistic point of view so that we can really truly step back into and fully reclaim our divine power and what it really means. And this conversation is a beautiful entry into that, introduction into that, for some of you, a deep remembrance. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with the pleasure priestess herself, Leola Watkins. Leola, it is so amazing to finally have you here. I was saying before we hit recorded, it was a bit of a shamanic journey to get here, and I'm so here for that. So welcome to Fire and Soul.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle, for having me on. And I want to express my gratitude to the listeners as well for being open to a sacred and sexy and potentially edgy or taboo conversation. Thank you for being open-minded and willing, and I'm really curious to see where we go today.
I appreciate your grace, and I love that we are both curious. I really don't have a planned, journey for us. I really want to flow. I trust you. I love your book, Sacred Sex Ed, and we will definitely talk about this. But the fact that you are such an embodied pleasure priestess and really helping, from my observation, liberate so many women from the shame and the shadows and the shackles of deep programming and also experience and abuse and all the things. I really want to honor your work. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. I have no idea. But let me actually weave in for my audience why it feels important to bring you here at this time. I really am looking at Fire and Soul as a sacred sanctuary to awaken to every area, every dimension, every portal. And I've now brought on one woman, Devana May. You probably know her. Yeah, to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about womb wisdom healing and just the divine feminine. And I had my first womb steam with Jaguar. You may be familiar with her work. She's out of Mexico at the Rewild retreat. And this brings me to you. So this is going to weave into you, which is so perfectly divinely orchestrated. That night we were having dinner and I was like, I feel like I feel like my next retreat or maybe the next one, I would love to like to bring in some of your services, like just really light. Let's just like gently, open this up to some of the women. And she was like, I would love to. And I was like, but I think they're scared. I was a little scared. Um, and that night, I thought I found her on Instagram and it was you. So I followed this woman named Leola and I thought that was her. And then you were like, hey, I see that you've got a podcast. I'd love to talk about sacred sex ed. And I was like, that's perfect. And I really thought we were continuing the conversation. And
Wow.
so then I realized no, because the next day in your stories, you and your now husband were walking a dog in a stroller, looking super cute and clearly not on retreat. And I was like, how could she be there when she's supposed to be here? So the whole thing was so divinely guided. And then I started listening to your podcast and obviously picked up your book. And I was like, you have to come on the show. And so just looking at that and just recognizing the grace in that, I have no doubt that this is so meant to be. So I just wanted to give you that perspective. And that's why it took a minute for me to circle back because I was like, oh, this is an interesting little, it's right. Because I'd never had that happen before with a guest on my podcast, 250 episodes. So I had to share that whole feeling.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. When you first started and speaking about walking to the altar, I got full body chills. And it's so funny. This work is big and it's edgy and it's expansive and it is the time for so many people. And I've had similar stories. One, the very first podcast that I did when I released my book, um, I emailed a bunch of people and this guy came back to me and was like, you have no idea how perfectly the time was that I opened up like that email. He was like, I was at a training and this beautiful woman walked by and I noticed myself triggered about her sexuality and her expression. And I thought to myself, I really need to address this piece of me. And then I open up my email and there's your book, Sacred Sex Ed. And I was like, so crazy. So for anyone that's listening, know you're here. You're welcome. And yeah, here for you on your path and your journey. This is beautiful.
And who knows? My goodness, I just got a little hit because I'm in Austin too. And I'm like, maybe we'll do something on retreat because I just led a retreat a week after that retreat. So about a month ago now. And we brought in like, the typical sound healing and cacao and really beautiful ceremonies. And we did a night of plant medicine. And the whole thing was just like really, really beautifully blissful and quite sacred. But as I was talking to the women from all around the world of like, would you be down for something like this? Because I was sharing my experience of group yoni mapping, the womb steam and just what it was opening me. And there was a lot of reverence. I took your quiz. I'm like the warrior wifey. So I'm like kind of consciously celibate in the moment for 2 years now and like really honoring that part of my path. But as I was sharing this, I was like, who here would be interested in like maybe a private sort of yoni mapping experience or something? Like every hand went up. And I was like, okay, all right. So I just want to let my listeners and viewers know too that like we're in this together. It's really a shame that so much of this has been taboo and we've been in secrecy or hiding or not even knowing how to relate to our bodies. And I love your byline, sacred sex ed for presence, pleasure, and purposeful relating. And I was like, first with self, then with another, right? Maybe the mirror in between. Like, anyway, so there's not a question in there yet. But before we dive into, I'm sure where we're going to flow, I'd love just to get some context. Anything that you feel called to share, you're on a ton of podcasts that feels relevant to just being introduced to fire and soul.
Yeah, absolutely. What feels really alive right now is to speak into the power that rests in the parts of us that we have been conditioned to be afraid of or to think are inherently bad or wrong. And for a lot of us as women, that is our sensual expression and our sexuality, as well as our relationship to our emotions, our big, beautiful, wild, chaotic, sometimes emotions, and our intuition. And it's my truth. And just to speak to the intuition piece a bit more, we've been conditioned to fear witches who are historically, the most intuitive beings that were healing themselves and others. And so just acknowledging and then the use of prostitute and whore, those words even prostitute comes from the word to prostrate, which is to lay down at the altar. And
Wow.
whether she laid down at the altar to receive a breast massage or to connect to her own pussy or to have sex with someone else, wow, there's a holiness. And whore comes from it actually etymologically means holy woman. It comes from this dance called the hora, which Jewish brides would do in communion with God, right?
Mm.
So yeah, just recognizing whoa, we've really demonized these parts of ourselves. So it's normal to be afraid of them. And I think that the reason why we've made women out to be afraid of these pieces is because there is so much power there. And these parts of ourselves can be dangerous. They truly can be dangerous. Our sexuality is powerful, and anything that has a lot of power has the ability to present danger. Now, how do we create safety around these energies? We don't create safety by ignoring them, shutting them down, pretending they don't exist. We create safety by mastery. And
Mm.
that's what my work is about. It's about reintegrating these parts of ourselves so we can master our intuitive knowing, so that we can create integrity around our emotional range as well as our sensuality and our sexuality. So I just want to give grace to those listening to understand why you might have the resistance to go to these places, and also empower you to see what's available on the other side should you lean in.
So this is so beautiful that you say this, because shadow work is obviously up for a lot of people. It's pretty much up for the entire collective right now, right? We're in a
Yep.
radical rebirth in every way. And so I'm so yeah, working into the shadows, leaning into them, simply being with them, sitting in them, right? That's the mastery. The mastery is, can we be with the resistance? Can we allow ourselves to be in the trance and something's guiding me, pulling me, which is higher self? This may feel scary. It may seem out of character. It may seem, quote, wrong or bad, but allow yourself to lean into that. That is how we earn the mastery. And I mean, not that I got the mastery by going up to the altar, but I actually was like, wow, I did that. I just allowed myself to sit up there, and I'm totally curious, fascinated, like leaning in. You're here, right? And I'm like, okay, you're doing a tantric thing, I think in December, maybe I need to be there. So I'm just allowing these curiosities to just guide me. So yes, thank you for shining light on the mastery of the teacher of resistance. Such a beautiful teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Yes,
Literally.
literally. Is there anything you want to share about, what brought you to this work? I mean, there's so many different threads you could weave.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I came into this work from a place of, I think this is very true for a lot of individuals, from a place of deep dis-ease within myself and wanting to heal. I came from a small town in Missouri, which was quite conservative in values and ways of viewing the world. And where I grew up was beautiful, and I received so many incredible values. And there were a lot of limitations and fear-based narratives around what I was capable of and my body and my sexuality. And I received what I would call collective sexual trauma. I believe that most people have collective sexual trauma. You don't need to have a particular event that you can point out and say, that's where all of my sexual trauma originated. No, it's the way that we teach and approach sexuality in the media, and the epigenetic connection to our sexuality. All of these things are contributing to this fear-based and shaming relationship to our life force, and therefore our sexuality as well. So what happened for me was that I I felt that there was something different than what I was being taught around my body and sexuality, and also what I was capable of in the world. And so I thought, okay, I'm just gonna go like explore and figure out what this is all about. I know that there's something special here. There's something sacred about my body and my pussy and my femininity that isn't being celebrated or addressed. And so I'm gonna get curious. And I did. And the thing is when you go into these circumstances, exploring your sexuality, especially as a young person, and your brain is still forming, and you also don't have any tools. You don't know how to talk about these things because no one's ever talked to you about them in an empowering way,
Yeah.
right? So I ended up putting myself in some situations that were just dangerous, and had many non-consensual sexual experiences, and really just like piled on more
Mm.
trauma on top of the collective trauma that I had. And yeah, so by the time I was in my early 20s, which was about 10 years ago, I started learning about meditation and yoga and some of those like easier entry spiritual paths.
Mm.
And it was great. Like there was something there. And it wasn't getting to like the deeper pieces for me. Uh, and it wasn't until around that same time I started dating a man that had previously dated a tantrika, and he was not my type at all. But he had this, again, presence and purpose in the way that he met me
Mm.
that was so magnetic.
Yeah.
And I felt so held,
Mm.
and it was just really unique. And I got curious about that, and he shared more about what he had learned from his ex about tantra, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. And I kind of first got into it for like the cool sex tricks, but in reality tantra is so much more. And it wasn't too long down the road that I was healing my inner child, and like my relationship to all of my body, not just my genitals, and really just like expanding and liberating myself on a whole different level. So that was kind of my entry point into this world.
So beautiful. It's let me ask you a question because I don't know, and then we're going to move into what is Tantra for those who are unfamiliar or maybe have a different perspective than you.
Yeah.
Um, but is a Dom kind of like who you're with? And it was that the energetic of what made you? Because I think a lot of women kind of fantasize about some of that stuff. There's no secret that like 50 Shades of Grey was read by like a one woman every 15 seconds in the world at that time. And I was one of them, right? And I couldn't put it down. And Lord knows I've certainly had my share of very erotic experiences, but this was like something that I had never experienced, right? So I was living
Yeah.
vicariously. But so are those connected, or is that a different realm, Dom
I
and
think for me, I would say that it's both. It can really be both. I would say that the way that I would describe his energy was more Shiva energy, or divine masculine energy.
Mm.
Um, and the world of dominance and being the more dominant one in the relationship is such a range. I think when people think about doming and subbing, their mind immediately goes to 50 Shades of
Yeah.
Grey or some like dungeon and pain play. And dominance can also look like, you know, be really like nurturing and caring, you know? There's such a thing like called like a mommy dom.
Mhm.
I would even say that in my work, I do work with men one-on-one, and women and couples, and I call that role being a pleasure priestess. And in many ways, I am taking the dominant role. I am leading. I'm a leader in love in that way. But it isn't such a like there we didn't have like a container that I would consider a dom sub relationship, although I have had experiences like that.
Yeah, that divine masculine that you're describing, I also know that that is like a big fantasy for a lot of women. And if there's anything that you want to add on that, because I was kind of like feeling that activation of like, oh, I don't even know how to relate to that word. And so don't go anywhere, stay. Right? For the listeners and viewers, if there's anything you wanted to expand on that word or how you've experienced women being sort of activated by that, even word.
Yeah, I mean, even like when you think about as a young girl, like for the listener in this moment, think about what did your mom call this part of your body? Like for some of us, it was like bottom or hoo-ha or like just like again it's another way of minimizing the power that is there.
Yes.
And whether the word that you use is pussy or I like yoni in Sanskrit, yoni means sacred cave, basically, um, or temple. So there can be really a power in intentionally choosing and using these words with the full force and power that they carry. It's like reclaiming that power and reclaiming your relationship to it.
Beautifully said. All right. So I know that really where you are in the world as a beautiful pleasure priestess and so many other things in which you are as a real leader in this sacred space, Tantra, divine feminine, and sacred or shamanic sexuality. I'd love to get your point of view on what Tantra means to you these days, being like 10 years into this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I'd like to do, okay, so the first thing I'll say is there are so many different perspectives and modalities of Tantra. You have classical Tantra, you have Neo Tantra, there's Egyptian Tantra, there's Taoist practices, there's shamanic sexuality that's taken bits of Tantra, there's even evidence of Tantra in Christianity, believe it or not. So there are so many different lenses and perspectives to look at this from. So what I like to do is look at the word itself, Tantra, which is a Sanskrit word. And Sanskrit is this ancient East Asian language in which many religious and spiritual texts were written. And Tantra is actually two Sanskrit concepts put together. So there's Tan and Tra. And Tan is to expand, and Tra is to liberate. So Tantra is this modality with the intention of empowering you to expand and be liberated, right? And what I love about that definition is that it's so broad. What is expansive and liberating to me is going to be very different than what's expansive and liberating to you and to each and every one of the listeners. Additionally, what is expansive and liberating to me now in this chapter of life is very different than what it was 5 years ago and probably what will be 5 years from now. So Tantra to me is really this practice of self-awareness and calibration with how we move through the world in presence instead of reacting what we've always done or what we see other people doing or what we know works, right? Now, so understanding that Tantra has been hypersexualized. And I think that that's something to note, especially in the more neo-tantric practices and Western practices of Tantra. And a lot of my work is takes a sexual lens. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge the classical origins. And I also don't feel that it's so wrong or bad that we have sexual like that people are really focusing on the sexual piece because it's clear that we need it. Like, we need that piece. So I think it's a really it's a powerful way in and just understanding there's so much more. Now, when we talk about shamanic sexuality, which to me is related, and those are the two lineages that I've really spent most of my time investing in. What I love about both of these lineages, shamanic sexuality and tantra, is that there's this foundational understanding that there is a spiritual world and there's a physical world and there's an energy that connects them. And that energy is what brought us all into the world.
Mm.
Sex, right? And if sex is the energy that brought us into this world, how can it not be sacred?
Yes.
And really just reclaiming that energy and also understanding that life force is in more than sex. It is in that moment where you have like a delicious bite of food and it like brings you this aliveness. It's in like the grief and the pain that's like, oh, I loved so deeply and I'm alive and I feel it and it
Yes.
hurts, you know? So
Yes.
it's just so much more. Yeah.
So good. Okay. And then the divine feminine, which really is inherent. That really feels like the energetic. That is the spirit world for me. But how would you, I want to hear you expand on the divine feminine, how this becomes the ultimate trifecta from my lens anyway.
I love talking about these topics so much.
Oh,
So yeah. So to me, what I have seen is that when people talk about the divine feminine, very often they're talking about the light feminine.
mhm.
And so when we talk about the light feminine, we're talking about the nurturing mother energy and the beautiful like demure lover and the innocent maiden, right? And like the parts of the feminine that have been culturally accepted and celebrated. Okay. And that is a part of the divine feminine. However, we have been abandoning what is called the dark feminine. And I want to just highlight that dark can be a really polarizing word or triggering word for some. And I want to lay the foundation to understand that there is light and there is dark and there is shadow.
Mm.
And what we really need to be more concerned about or wary of or conscious of is the shadow piece. And there is shadow in the light and there is shadow in the dark. In the light, there is the shadow of the naivete of the young maiden energy. There is the shadow of the controlling mother. There is the shadow of the martyr that's always giving herself and never prioritizing, right? So there's shadow in the light. There's also shadow in the dark, but the dark is just as godly, just as divine as the light. It is the sensuality, it is the intuition, it is the emotions that we were talking about earlier that can be expressed in really wholesome and empowering ways. But there's also shadow there too. There's the one that uses her intuition to destroy reputations, and there's the chaotic emotional expression that is taking up way more space than is that is appropriate in that space. And there's obviously the shadow of the sexuality that is, create like destroying lives, marriages, like even just expressing your sexuality from a place of wanting to take, right? But there is just as much godliness in that dark. The dark is where the seed sprouts and the dark of the womb where the baby is grown and the dark of the chrysalis. It's magical, it's transformational, there's a lot of power there. And so what's important to me when we speak of divine feminine, it's when you can integrate your light feminine and your dark feminine, that's when you step into your inner queen energy, your goddess, your divine feminine.
So good, way powerful. I love the way that you describe that. I've never heard anyone say it that way. And I see so many people, including friends of mine who are very well-known coaches, talking about the reclamation of the dark feminine and on some levels, sometimes, and this is why I love your work so much, even though I'm brand new to it, it can feel kind of heavy-handed, or it
Yeah.
can feel like, ooh, we're going that deep into the other end of the pendulum. And that it, for me, just based on observation or maybe interest at this point in my life, it feels like maybe it's not as well integrated and balanced. So the way that you just described this, it's like for that healthy fulcrum, right? Really living in the center of it all, allowing for it all, but understanding that there is a polarity, right? And then finding yourself within that, within your own range, and everybody's going to be different. Is that a little bit more of that? Did I get that according to what you were
Yes.
describing?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I tend to find that women tend to live more in the light feminine, both in the integrated bits, but also in the shadow. There's so much light feminine shadow. And in some ways, I would say there might even be more light feminine shadow in the world than dark feminine shadow because we're just so afraid of even going into the dark feminine and doing and being in that place from a place of integrity. So that's where a lot of women need work is integrating the light feminine shadow and then integrating the dark feminine holistically.
What I love about your book is that you offer up home play, which are all kinds of beautiful practices. And you have, your book is really broken up into three parts. So we're talking right now a part called Illuminate Your Shadows. And I didn't plan on going according to the book, but we're here. So without giving away a home play, what is a way for a woman who feels like she might be a little bit imbalanced and more embodied in the light feminine, even though she's wanting to reclaim the dark feminine? What would be one way for her to just begin to get familiar with what that even means, what that could look like?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a piece on really living in the body and making decisions from that place. So when we're living in the body, we're really attuned to the subtle shifts and the openings and the contractions. And this could even be a practice to do in this moment, like really feeling into, like if you felt contraction to listen to this, like, ooh, I feel a little opening, but I'm also a little scared. It's taking that moment to get curious about where is that coming from? Where is the fear coming from? And getting really curious and just going a layer deeper and beginning to observe your emotional reactions without judgment, being curious about your triggers because those are usually direct projections of your shadow, as well as just being conscious of your internal dialogue. And generally, like we're not as conscious of the actual dialogue, but we can feel in our body that something is off, and that can be the thread that we pull to get more curious about what is operating here. Is the belief that I'm operating off of mine, or is it something that I've taken on from someone else or my past trauma? And how can I live in the present moment with this and be curious as
It's
well?
really beautiful. It was reminding me, I was on a group coaching call yesterday, and one of the women, she's really moving more into a new area of her business. She's been like a business coach for 25 years, very successful, and she's wanting to awaken her own feminine, her feminine. She doesn't call it divine feminine, but she did a whole master class, and she had, I don't know, 150 women there. And it was an interesting observation for her that she shared with us. And I would just be curious if you would like to expand on it. She said the chat thread lit up with, they didn't really know what to do with the information because they said, I don't know what feminine means. I don't even know what mine is. And I was like, wow, I think there are so many women, including myself in moments. And of course, we're driven by so much masculine energy, which can have subtle nuances to it. I'm becoming
Yeah.
more and more familiar with mine, but I don't know if there's even a question, but I know there's a thread here that wants to be woven in around how to get women even just connected to what the word feminine might mean and how she can begin relating that to the divine, darker light. So it's like we're going all the way back to the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can feel so uncomfortable for us to like get curious because we are so rewarded for being in our masculine. Like as a society, we are so rewarded for what we do and our output and less about just being and feeling and being in the present moment. So I want to acknowledge how challenging it can be. What I found to be really, really powerful is surrounding myself with women that I feel are in that feminine energy and trying it on and getting curious about our own individual expressions. I think it can be really powerful to write a list of some of like the qualities that you would associate with the feminine and think about which ones you feel really embodied in, and which ones you feel there is space to expand and like get curious about taking action on those. So maybe you feel like sensuality is something that you struggle with and you notice that is a feminine quality. Okay, what is sensuality? It's being in your five senses. And so taking the time to slow down and instead of just getting dressed really quickly in the morning, like feeling the fabric and getting curious about the colors, like with your eyes that are engaging your senses. We eat like it's not even like it needs to be this, like I've got to like redo my whole life. It's like, no, do your life, but do it from the lens of femininity, from the lens of sensuality, from the lens of your intuition, or from the lens of nurturing yourself. Like try on some of these words that represent the feminine and see what would it look like to move through today as a nurturing woman. What would it look like to move through today as a woman that honors her emotions, and kind of taking a week to maybe pick one word each day of the week, or maybe spend a week on a whole word. Let your intuition guide you with that as well.
I love that. A gentle interruption to let you know about our upcoming Soul Essence Retreat. This is happening March 20th through the 24th, 2025, in the Austin area at a place called the Hilltop Haven in Texas Hill Country with 7 acres of expansive views and a beautiful, luxurious private property. And these retreats are just so incredibly special. They get deeper and deeper every time, meaning that our hearts open and there's a softening and a reconnection to our souls, our truest, most beautiful, magnetizing essence. And the women that come to these retreats, it's just highly conscious and beautiful vibes. And a lot of them don't know anyone before they arrive and leave absolutely connected in the heart. Besties for life. A lot of people say that, but this is actually the energetic. This is the experience. And there's so much more to share about all of this, but it's basically 4 days to completely reset and replenish your life experience and to tap back in to the energy of your heart that is so pure and so beautiful and so joyous and free. We've been on a remarkable journey, many of us, these past several years. And so the women that come to these retreats, very like-minded, very like-hearted, and no doubt you will love giving yourself this gift. So I'm going to encourage you to check out the link that I'm about to share and maybe reserve one of the final spots that are available. You can head on over to michelle-sorrow.com and check out the offering called the Soul Essence Retreat. I'll look forward to seeing you on the other side. You are such a bright light. Like you're literally a glow. I just have to say it. And so I'm like, is this really what you've cultivated for yourself, like on a daily? And when you're not in this really sort of luminous moment for yourself that feels super activated and beautiful to experience, by the way, what a gift. What do you do then to either allow for whatever wants to come through, or do you really want to be here all the time? Like I'm now like, this is just got a personal girlfriend to girlfriend level. Like your light is so bright and it's really beautiful and liberating, right? And so I'm like, who wouldn't want to be around you? And I can only imagine you in a teaching, environment. It's just, you're safe too. You feel safe and free. And so anyway, yeah, the light, like, how do you keep that alive? And it's so juicy and beautiful.
Thank you so much. That's such a kind reflection. I really appreciate that. Thank you
You're
so much.
welcome.
It feels so good to be seen in that. And I'm going to share some things that I have done to build my life in a way that I feel cultivates this energy. And I also want to share that my life is challenging. There are things that are not easy at all. And just to be really vulnerable, I recently got married and my husband has bipolar disorder, and we found that out very recently. And so it's been like a really, really challenging chapter. But one thing I have to say is, and I was reflecting this to my girlfriends and my husband yesterday, is I'm so grateful that I've built my life in a way that this is like hard and I still feel connected to my essence. And
Mm.
one of the things that's really supported me in that is creating a lot of spaciousness. So, one thing that I see when people are approaching spirituality or having a more spiritual life or spiritual practice is to go at it from a very masculine perspective, particularly with like morning routine. And this is like an example,
Yeah.
but for morning routine, I remember when I first got into this world, it was okay, get up at 6 a.m., meditate for 30 minutes, do like your yoga, journal, like very like I've got to do all my practices and then I've got to work out and it's a lot, right?
I used
And
to do that.
so
Mhm.
one shift that I have is I don't do work before noon. Or I don't take any appointments before noon. That's like a hard boundary that I've set in my life and in my business. And so from when I wake up until noon, I have that time to use my feminine intuition and my like felt sense in my body to decide what I need that day. And
Mhm.
so some days, like today, that was, I'm going to do an Instagram post from bed. That feels good. I'm going to stay in bed extra long, but I'm also going to be a little productive. And then I went and I had some like muffins that I made a couple days ago. I had that for breakfast and I read my book and like I'm continuing like my own practice and learning. And then I went for an hour long walk and I voice noted some of my friends and some of my clients. And then I came back and I did my makeup and I got ready. But yesterday looked very different, but I always have that time. Now, not always, but like pretty much always. I don't take appointments before noon unless it's like I really need to. So that's one thing that I feel like has been life-changing for me. And I want to also share that wasn't something that happened overnight. I used to have an alarm clock. I used to get up at 7 or 8 a.m. every day and be like working by 8:30, like really diligently be on meetings. And it was like slowly I shifted my life to this place and I built a business that really supports that, a pleasure-led business as I call it. Which is totally possible. You can be a six-figure or multi-six-figure business owner and lead from pleasure. I typically only take calls once or twice a week. Like one day or twice a week, I'll do calls, and it's again only starting at noon. So I would say spaciousness has been the biggest thing. And if you're struggling with, oh my God, that sounds overwhelming and impossible, what I like to say is then figure out how you can start with like 3 things a day that you can make a pleasure practice. Now, this doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to lay down and do sex magic with myself. This can be, again, like, okay, instead of just making my coffee in the morning, I'm going to slow down and really enjoy this cup of coffee. Or when you take a shower, enjoying the water on your skin. Or
Yes.
when you pick out your clothes, make it ornamentation is my spiritual practice today. How can I be my highest self? And
Yes.
so pick 3 things that you would normally do and just make them a pleasure practice.
Okay, beautiful. So when I was in the shower this morning prepping for you, and by the way, I have a very similar schedule, and I cannot say how life-changing it's been. Happened for me 3 years ago in the midst of just like a wild deconstructive awakening that's still going. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to my business if I don't have this drive? Or will I get fat and be unhealthy and have no energy if I'm not working out like an hour a day and going to, I would go to soul cycle classes 5 days a week or hot yoga and the hardest one. And then I kind of stopped all of it. And it's like same thing. Like I try not to work before about 11 a.m. my time, but this morning I was in the shower or whenever it was 10 a.m. And I was just, just soaping myself down. And I thought of you, not in my shower with me. But like, I was like, I wonder if you just always like, luxuriate slowly, or if there are just some days you're like, listen, I got to just get it done. Like, it's so amazing how I'm a conscious woman who knows a lot of women. And like, you're human too, but
Oh,
you
yeah.
so embodied to me, right? And so I'm just like, but it was beautiful inspiration because you were an expander for me. I was like, slow it down, enjoy it, feel the water, like, and then it just turned into a whole different experience in the shower that I wish I could do every day, right? So yeah, I mean, I imagine there are some days you're like, you just got to get it done.
Obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, I do have this thing where like pretty much every time I take a shower, I just sit down in the shower and I just like sit in the hot water and my
Yes.
husband's like, what are you doing? Um, but
Me
I will
too.
say that it's a muscle, and in the beginning, it's challenging. But the more you lean in to seeing life this way, the easier it gets. Another really easy prompt to approach that I think is even more inclusive than the ones I've been using is to, in every moment or as often as you remember, to consider how can I make this moment even more pleasurable?
Yeah.
And waking up in the morning, how can I make today even more pleasurable?
Mm.
Right. So that's another like mantra. And again, it's a little bit difficult at first, but you'll start to you'll rewire your brain to see the world differently by committing to that practice.
Yeah, and for me, I was immediately thinking of, well, what would that be for me? Almost on a daily, it would just be slowing things down and creating more spaciousness in my body, in my breath, in my life, and allowing me to get present, which is where all the magic is. Speaking
Yeah.
of expansion, this has been such a yummy conversation, but I want to go a couple of different areas because I love your book so much, and we'll definitely link it in the show notes. And I want to hear from anyone who feels called to share, reach out with your home play practices because I think it's so important. Expanding your awareness. And I know that you've written the book and it's fairly new. What did this come out in the summer of 24?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did.
Okay.
It came out July 8th.
So I want to talk about expanding your awareness and then moving into liberating your eros, however you refer to that or say
Both
it.
work.
Okay, exactly. I've heard it different ways, and I think I say eros. But I also want to hear what is your favorite part of the book, like to just talk about, and like I want to like kind of weave that in toward the end. But first, anything that wants to come through around what does expanding your awareness even mean?
Yeah, I can kind of link those two together. So
Okay.
The book comes in three parts, and the first part is about healing your sexual shadow, which we talked a bit about. And so it's like kind of cleaning the slate. Expanding your awareness is about now let's sow some new empowering seeds of what else is available.
Yes.
Because the truth is like this book is about sexual liberation, but sexual liberation looks different from person to person, which is the tantric approach, right? What is expansive and liberating to you is different from me. So the idea is that I give you a bunch of different ideas. Like here, for example, like here's how to, talk about what your desires and your fears around your sexuality with others. Here's a menu of relating styles, everything from monogamy to polyamory, and here's how they're all really spiritual and powerful, and how to know what might be the most suitable for you in this lifetime or in this chapter of your life. So it's just kind of getting a new template. Now, one of the my favorite chapters in the book is called Intentional Intimacy, and it's about the four types of sex, the four types of intimacy, and this is another like menu that you could look at to expand your awareness. So I'd love to just like run through those briefly if that works.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I, became a pleasure priestess, I thought that there were two types of sex. I thought that there was, good sex and there was bad sex and intimacy in general. And when I'm saying sex, I'm not just meaning like penis and vagina. I'm like speaking about sexual intimacy, romantic intimacy in general. But I thought that there was like good chemistry and there was bad chemistry. There was good sex and there was bad sex. But really, most of my intimacy at that time could be considered bad sex, in that my bar for good sex was very low because I wasn't really asking for what I wanted, and I didn't really know what my boundaries were, and I didn't know what to do if someone crossed my boundaries, and I just like didn't even know what was on the menu. I didn't know what was possible. And I really just had I had this sense that there was something more, but it was really just an inkling of what was possible. And in that, I was really just leaving a lot of potential for depth and emotionally connective sex and intimacy and healing and like euphoric, orgasmic bliss. I was just like leaving that all on the table. And I kind of just left it up to chance because I went into intimacy with zero intention, maybe a little bit of intention. And I expected my partners to read my mind as well. And as I got deeper into Tantra and shamanic sexuality, I started to approach intimacy more differently. I started to slow down. I started to be more intentional and curious about how and why I might be into certain things. And really, how I like to describe intentional intimacy is thinking about what could happen if you brought an intention and you decided every sexual or intimate experience gets you closer to your highest self or God or the divine feminine or whatever you believe in.
Mm.
And that's what intentional intimacy is about. And so there's four types of sex. There's reproductive sex, which is the type of sex that it's what it sounds like. It's like to make a baby, right? And to me, this is the type of sex that is the most accepted worldwide across all cultures and religions. Then you have recreational sex or intimacy, which is the type of intimacy that you do for fun and it feels good. But generally, this type of sex is like, how quickly can I get to an orgasm, and is generally ended by the orgasm. It's a little bit more goal oriented.
Yes.
Nothing wrong with that, but there's also more available. And I
Mm.
find that this is the type of sex or intimacy that most people are seeking out or having. Then you have the juicy bits. You have restorative and transformational. So, restorative intimacy is the type of connection where you are using this life force energy, this like kundalini or eros or sexual like aliveness to heal your body, your mind, your heart, or your soul.
Mm.
And many people listening have probably had restorative intimacy. They just didn't know what that was. Maybe it was like the type of intimacy where you're like crying after, or maybe it's like you had a fight with your partner and you come back to love and then it's like, oh, it's better. I've also had like sex or intimacy when I'm really stressed out and it like helps me like recalibrate or settle down. Nowadays, if I feel a headache coming on, I'm like, I'm going to do a little self-pleasure practice, or I'm going to see if my husband wants to have sex, because I
Mhm.
know that there's a possibility that it could actually heal my headache. And there's actual science that backs this up, that having orgasms, having pleasure is good for us because it releases really good hormones and it also boosts our immune system. So that's restorative. And then lastly, you have transformational, and transformational intimacy or sex is the type of connection that gives you this like opportunity to see the world in a new way, like could actually change your life or change the way that you connect with others. And it's my experience that this kind of intimacy can feel like a plant medicine journey. It's like you feel like, oh my God, I feel like I just left my body. Or maybe you have this like aha moment, or maybe you have your first heartgasm or a cosmic orgasm, or maybe even you're just trying something new. Like transformational intimacy could be connecting with someone for the same gender for the very first time. And that can change the way you see the world and humans, right? And I learned this framework from ISTA, which is the International School of Temple Art. So I want to give them credit. Um, but it's just a really powerful way to again come back to the intention. What could happen if I decided every sexual or intimate experience gets me closer to my highest self, to God?
Yeah,
So
I love that so much. And it's interesting because it was only just a few years ago where I became familiar with John Weiland's work, which I'm sure you know him. And I know that
mhm.
you are connected to his ex, Madeline Moon, who wrote you a beautiful review for your book. And yeah, and so I had heard about that for the first time, of not having sex for an outcome, right? And that was so new for me. And I have a feeling it might be new for people listening or watching. So I'd like to expand on that for a moment, if you could. And that was also the first time I'd, it's almost embarrassing to say, but I feel like I also need to go first. I need to demystify these secrets that like we think we're the only one and we're not. Like there's a whole other world out there, and there's other women just like you, and men, by the way, that want to be freed up. And so this is why I'm just being vulnerable. But like the idea of like even eye gazing or synchronized breathing, or even getting present to your breath during intimacy or sex, or all of that was new to me up until about 3 years ago. So if it's new to me, I'm imagining it's new to some of my listeners and viewers. And so is there anything that's there that you would like to expand on that you're picking up on? Because I know this is your world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak into a couple of things. One being that with Tantra, it really is about letting go of expectations and goals. Goals are about doing and intentions are about being. So, a lot of this work, especially when we're approaching intimacy from a new perspective, is like letting go of wanting it to end or like things to happen in a certain way, and going in instead with an intention of I'm going to be connection, I'm going to be love, I'm going to be present, whatever feels really alive for you. And you could decide this with your partner, you could decide this on your own. And I'll also say that you don't need to, like, Tantra and Shamanic Sexuality can both be incredibly liberating as solo practices as well. And I do talk about that more in the book and in other places. But another big piece is sound, breath, and movement. Those are the three basic tools of Tantra to move energy. Sound, breath, and movement. So being really curious as well, I noticed that the sound tends to be a really hard one for women and for men, but understanding that for many of us from a young age, we it wasn't okay for us to be in our bodies and to be sexual or even to express our emotions loudly. It's impolite. You might, and especially when it comes to like sensuality, like you might get caught. For a lot of us, like we learned about and we had our first sexual experiences in a state of like fight or flight urgency, because we like it's got to be in the dark and I got to be quiet because I don't want to be caught, and when I'm done I need to hide the evidence, you know. And so it's like, oh, so many of us are carrying that into the present day and not realizing how limiting that is. And when we allow ourselves to sound, to be with the pleasure in our bodies or even the pain, it actually allows us to be more in the present moment and have more of that energy move through our body so that we're also expanding our orgasmic potential. It's that sound of like, ah, that can bring that pleasure into your heart. or into your third eye so that you're like feeling the pleasure more holistically, like having full body orgasm, having, cosmic orgasm, etc.
Yeah, so good. And I remember that when I first heard about that, like, oh, what if there's no outcome? Then that is really the embodiment of this new potential, way of experiencing life that you're recommending, which is how can I bring more pleasure to this moment? How can life be more pleasurable today? And so it's even in those acts of what if it wasn't about an outcome at all, right? And it changed everything for me. It was like I got so present, not only with the partner at the time, but also in my own solo practices. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I just really want to take a moment to honor that because it may seem so simple, but it's these simple practices that are the foundational pieces for us to really begin our expansion process. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're focused on one thing happening, you very likely will be missing all of the other magic that's
Yeah.
available on the table.
Yeah, I know. So good. Okay. So did you weave in liberate your eros, or is there also more in there? Because I feel like I know like the sound and body and movement, definitely that feels like eros, but what else in there can we weave that might be something that, yeah, our listeners and viewers can even try on, or even what that means? Or let's start with eros. What does that mean for you?
Yeah, so Eros comes from the god Eros, who is in the Greek lineage the god of, pleasure and sensuality and sexuality. So that's where the word comes from. And then you have the word like erotic, Eros and erotic. It's like, oh, it's that, very sexual like expression. Um, and so, but to me, Eros is acknowledging this like turn on, like it's that energy of turn on, it's that life force. And for me, Eros isn't holistically like this hypersexual experience. I find it synonymous with Kundalini, with life force. To me, I've felt like I remember when I first started learning about my life force, Eros, Kundalini, and I went for a walk and I passed this woman on the street that was older, like she was probably in her 60s or 70s, but she was so well dressed, so
Mhm.
eclectic, and like so much like, oh, I want to be her when I'm older. And I felt this like turn on in my body. And it was very clear, I don't want to have sex with this woman at all, 0%. I'm not bisexual. But I did feel this like, ooh, aliveness. And so to me, that's what Eros is it's that turn on, it's that aliveness. And the more that we allow ourselves to, again, live in our bodies, the more we might notice that and even use that as a way to be led in our lives, to be curious about being pleasure led. Um, and that requires discernment as well. But liberating your arrows to me and that particular part of the book is really about expanding beyond and using your sensuality to explore the depths of the human experience, to really capitalize on this energy to magnetize your desires via sex magic. We also talk about things like sacred surrender. And to me, that's where that Dom energy comes in, those like power play concepts, like understanding that when we consciously choose to allow someone else to hold our energy, it can be this sacred surrender that allows us to like be totally present because we're not having to make any choices. We
Yes.
make we make over 35,000 decisions a day. And what happens when like we let that go for a minute? Like you can actually like hit a level of presence that you probably never have before. So that's kind of what that part of the book about is about. It's about also being like, how do you be evidence for others in this way as well, just by being? And that to me, so being a pleasure priestess.
So, so, so good. Okay, this is a beautiful weaving toward. I know that we're going to wrap the conversation soon, but we wanted to talk about. I asked you before I hit record, what's lighting you up the most right now? And you talked about this whole dark feminine thing. And I saw you post this morning. So let's see, we're recording November 21st of 24. And you said, I am bisensual.
Yeah.
And and I thought even that, like, that's you liberating your own eros, at least from my observation. You're clear that like it's not about having sex with other women. You're a married woman, you're a straight woman. I believe that you're in a monogamous relationship as far as I can see. But yet wanting to experience her touch and her skin and her neck and her hair and allow her to experience you. And even just like right now, like you're playing with your braid, like, right, you're feeling into the energetics. And I was thinking, wow, one of the things that makes some of my retreats so special is run a little bit of a heart opener, like flower medicine with some MDMA in there. And the women, we just get so freed up and we're like goddess energy. And it's like, feeding each other grapes kind of thing, and not really, but like, and it's clean, it's pure, but it feels so connected and sensual. And so anyway, I just, yeah, whatever that there is in there for you to want to expand on around the dark feminine that's really lighting you up, owning your bisensuality. What does that mean? And why is it important for you to share this? And what does this mean for our own collective healing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different directions I could go with this, but just to clarify, bisexual is like not bisexual. It's like I want to connect sensually with other women and
Yeah.
touch their bodies and like vilify them and worship them, but I don't want to date them or have sex with them in the same way that I would with a man. And I think that this is actually like that type of connection with other women is so healing and so needed, and
Yes.
it's so initiating. Like it's truly healing the sisterhood wound to like allow ourselves to be held and connected with other women. And it is so, I'm sure, like for thousands of years we've been afraid to lean into this and taught to be afraid, because that's where a lot of our power is. Like when women stand together, whoa, like it's one thing to have
Yeah.
one powerful woman, but when you have a lot, that's a whole other thing. And it's my belief that in every woman, there is this priestess that holds herself immaculately and can also hold others and stands for the highest love for herself and her sisters and her beloved and the world. And part of that is being sexually liberated and a leader in love and initiatrix as well. And this to me, the priestess is another way of saying the divine feminine. It's like integrating the light feminine, the nurturing, the beauty, and the dark feminine, like intuition, like tapping in and being attuned to what's needed in a moment. And what's lighting me up is like teaching other women these tools, and unearthing her. Like in ancient times, there were leagues of women that were initiated into these mysteries, and they were like very comfortable connecting with each other in this way, but also creating peace and partnership, and doing what I call is like seducing the world into a greater good. We've been taught seduction is so bad, but what if we reclaimed seduction and used it to like seduce our man into being the best version of himself,
So good.
right? And so I think that this is like there's a lot of energy there and there's a lot of power. And so it's been put underground, but like we're in this era where we get to unearth her and like allow her to dance naked with her sisters and bring her man back into his heart and just like be devoted to like feeling the godliness in her body. And so that's something that's really alive within me now, and kind of where I'm pivoting a lot of my energy.
Yeah, I can feel it. And it's it's deep. And it's also like when you said like, oh, dancing naked with women, it was reminding me of the Rewild retreat. Like I remember seeing the ads and like all of their Instagram posts around it a couple of years ago. And they were doing that down the river and up in Spicewood, which is just outside of Austin. And I was like, oh man, I'm so drawn to that. Like my soul knows that's right. Like we're supposed to be this free. We're supposed to connect with our sisters in this way. But I was raised in a household where my mother never showed her body. I never saw,
Yeah.
my sister the same. And my sister's a little bit more liberated. But I'm just so grateful that there are women like you who feel this strong call to really lead with this liberated love and sensuality and integrity, by the way. Like you're so embodied in this call that it allows us to know that this is out there, it's possible, and to go explore our ranges and our curiosities. So with that said, is there anything that you feel called to share or that you wish you had been asked as we begin to weave out this conversation?
Yeah, I just want to add this piece on us being in a time where we are our own mystery schools. Our body is our mystery school. And we're moving away from this time where we need to go to a guru or like put all of our energy into like one deity. It's in the work that I am inspired by and want to bring to the world is actually like, don't trust me, trust yourself. Like,
Yes.
let's help you get clear on how to read your own mystery school that's happening inside of you. And with that, I want to just acknowledge that if you feel called to this path, feel called to this work, feel called to this journey, you get to be your guide. There is no need to rush. There are ways to just witness and dip your toe in and take it one step at a time. Or you can dive right in. And there's a lot of empowerment to be discerning and to be sovereign. And I think that that's a really important piece, especially again, when you are working with these energies that are so powerful. So I just want to share that there are so many ways to do it, and I'm happy to support women on that or consult if they have questions.
Beautiful. Exactly. So speaking to that, where is the best place where we can find out more about your services, your offerings, your events? And of course, we'll link to your book, Sacred Sex Ed, in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. You can also search Sacred Sex Ed on Amazon. It's there. But if you go to my website, it's talktantratome.com. It's also my name on Instagram currently. And yeah, there's like a whole link on how to work with me. I have options that are only online. I have hybrid options. I have in-person retreats, and everything can just be found there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like so excited right now. I didn't know where this conversation was going to go in terms of me. I knew that it was definitely spirit led, pleasure led, clearly. And I'm like, wow, I'm so grateful that you live literally in Austin and I'm here in Austin. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person at one of your cool events and also meeting other women and men in your community because it feels important. I love what you said about if this is calling you in any way, how fast or slow you want to go, like honor your pace through that discernment, but be around other women who are embodied in their feminine, and see what that invokes in you and just all of that. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your pleasure with us. It's such an honor to sit with you.
It was great. I love this conversation so much. It was amazing. It lit me up. So thank you.
You're so welcome.